Okay, good evening, Mount Lebanon students and families. On behalf of the district and our high school counseling department, I'd like to welcome you to this evening's presentation on financial aid. My name is Jared Smith. I am the newest addition to our high school counseling team. Also joining me tonight, Ms. Tara Lee J., high school counseling department chair, and Mr. Robert Smiley, information systems manager for the district. So we've oftentimes had to become accustomed to during this past 6 months, we've shifted to a virtual format for this year's financial aid night. Before we begin, I'd just like to briefly share a couple of housekeeping items. We put some helpful links to various financial aid documents shared with us by FIA, the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency, onto the Mount Lebanon High School Counseling page. These will be useful references for you as you complete your financial aid journey. A recording of this presentation and the PowerPoint used tonight will also be available for you to access via the website. Additionally, we have hard copies of these documents that we've put together in folders that can be picked up from the high school counseling office upon request. I would also like to take a moment to encourage students and parents to explore the multitude of scholarship opportunities that are available to Mount Lebanon students. You're going to hear quite a few different terms tonight, and one of the most important terms is free money. Free money usually comes in the form of grants and scholarships, and while institutional funding like merit and other college-based awards continue to be the biggest source of financial aid, there are many national, regional, local, and Pittsburgh Foundation sponsored scholarships that students should investigate. Many of these scholarship opportunities are going to be available primarily to senior students. Seniors can access local Pittsburgh Foundation and other scholarship applications through their student Naviance accounts. You can begin to explore these now, and as applications become available, they will be posted. Many of these scholarship applications you'll find are going to be due in February. For our junior students, the Richard J. Madden Scholarship is a primarily need-based scholarship that's been available for over 18 years and awarded annually to a Mount Lebanon junior. This application will be available through your child's Naviance account and must be completed online. We'll send out notifications via email when this application becomes available. In order to stay within a reasonable time frame tonight, we ask that you hold your questions until the end of the presentation, which should be around an hour long. You'll have the opportunity to virtually raise a hand, and we will unmute your microphone so that participants can ask questions. We're going to try to get to everyone's questions, but for the sake of time, we do intend to limit the Q&A portion to around 30 minutes. Thankfully, our wonderful presenters from Washington and Jefferson College have kindly agreed to field any questions that we may not get to via email. Their contact information will be displayed before and after the slideshow. In our current financial climate, we know that conversations surrounding financial aid and paying for college are more topical than ever, and we want to be sure that your voices are heard and your questions are answered. To help you better understand the process of applying for financial aid that may help you to pay for your child's education, we're delighted to welcome Washington and Jefferson College's Financial Aid Director, Ms. Bethany Bowman, Senior Associate Director of Financial Aid, Mr. Kevin Toddy, Ms. Dana Stout, Assistant Director of Financial Aid and Loan Officer, and Assistant Director of Admissions, Ms. Marlinda Dowdy. Ms. Bowman received her Bachelor of Science degree from Texas State University. Prior to coming to W&J, she served as the Director of Financial Aid at Lamar University in Beaumont, Texas. She's been working in financial aid for more than 10 years for public and private colleges and universities, and she brings a passion for collaboration to her role wherever she serves. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Ms. Bowman and Mr. Toddy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. You sound so well versed in financial aid. I feel like you could do part of this presentation. So thank you so much, Mount Lebanon, for inviting us this evening. We're going to talk about financial aid. We are going to do some PowerPoints, and we're going to use lots of terms, but I'm hoping this can be a conversation format for us, and then we are going to be able to answer questions at the end. We are here as a team. We absolutely approach financial aid that way. And one of the reasons we come to you as a team, Kevin, Dana, Marlinda, and I, is because that's really how you and your students and your support system and your family have to approach your college search and your financial aid application season. You really need to be in partnership with your parents and in partnership with your school counselors. There's all these other resources out there. So that's part of why we approach it this way. So with that said, let's go ahead and get the show on the road. Next slide, please. So what is financial aid? The reason we start at this fundamental level is because, like so many things, there's so much information out there, and there also is some misunderstandings. And then there also is an element of things have changed. I've been in financial aid for 10 years. I was an undergrad 10 long years before that, and things were different then. And so that's why we want to take a moment to explain just fundamentally, what is financial aid? Financial aid consists of funds provided to students and families to help pay for post-secondary educational expenses. The philosophy of the federal government, so the Department of Education, which administers federal student aid funds, is that parents have a responsibility to assist with college expenses. Now, that doesn't mean that parents can, or that they want to, or that that's a decision that they've made. That's a decision every single family has to make for themselves. The reason we point it out is because this underlying philosophy is informing everything tied to federal financial aid funds. Okay. Next slide, please. So these are some terms it's important that you become familiar with. I'll use them this evening. We'll do them in the Q&A. Mr. Smith referred to some. The colleges and universities you're applying to are going to refer to them. So it's a great way to arm yourself with information so that you understand what you're reading and you recognize things. So that's why we want to go over them. So FAFSA, that's the free application for federal student aid. That first F, the free, that's very important. Unfortunately, in this day and age, and it's probably been going on, I think Kevin and Dana would agree, it's been going on for years, that there are imposter sites out there that will tell you that they'll fill out your FAFSA for you for a fee. You should never pay to have your FAFSA completed. It is free. And I promise you, if you go in partnership with your financial aid office, it is something that all families can and your school can support you to complete. So just be mindful of that. It's fafsa.ed.gov. Your student aid report, what you'll hear financial aid offices sometimes refer to, or if you look it up online, as a SAR, S-A-R. Your student aid report is the output. After you complete your FAFSA, the student aid report is what you, the student, will be emailed. And then also here at the office, we'll get that. So sometimes for need-based scholarships, a scholarship donor organization may say, we need you to submit your SAR, S-A-R, that stands for your student aid report, and that is emailed to you after you complete your FAFSA. You can also access it, again, by going to fafsa.ed.gov. Cost of attendance. This is probably the biggest buzzword in financial aid, and it's probably cause for the most confusion and anxiety for families. So we're going to take a minute and we're going to talk about your cost of attendance versus what you actually pay, your bill, versus what your charges are, and then there's your financial aid. When you hear the term cost of attendance, that is a term that the Department of Ed has told schools like Washington and Jefferson and the other colleges and universities you're applying to, that they need to have a cost, that they need to determine that amount for families. The cost of attendance is made up of direct and indirect charges, things like tuition and fees, room and board, which is an old-fashioned way of saying your dormitory cost, and your meal plan. But it's also going to include things what referred to as indirect costs. So those costs that families incur that the college doesn't charge you, but are still a burden on the family. So things like daily living expenses, a cell phone, health insurance. So that's the cost of attendance, which again is different than actually the bill that you're going to be paying. And we'll go into that a little bit more in a little while. Your expected family contribution. This is another one of those acronyms. In financial aid, and for any other government employees out there, we love acronyms. We beat them to death sometimes. So you're going to hear a lot of them while you're going through the financial aid cycle as you go through your college search process. So expected family contribution, you'll also hear it referred to as your EFC. That is the number that is calculated after you enter in the FAFSA, your student aid report is processed by the Department of Ed. They give us an EFC. You can see that when you submit your FAFSA. If everything is complete on the FAFSA and it's signed and there are no what we call rejects, so nothing, parent information wasn't left off or there was a problem with the signature. If everything is submitted, you actually will see that number calculated once you click submit. It'll say, based on the information you provided, here's your EFC. You can always log back in and see it. That's the number that is sent to schools, and that's what drives what type of federal, and in some cases, state aid you may be eligible for and institutional aid. And again, that number is not actually what you're going to be paying. That's just the number based on the formula that's built into the FAFSA that the Department of Ed has said, this is what we believe this family's contribution could be. But please don't confuse that with that, well, if your EFC is $25,000, that's all it will cost you. Or if your EFC is 0, that's all it will cost you. It is a number that we use. There is current legislation out there right now to change that because frankly, it's not as relevant anymore. But again, bureaucracy is big. Government takes a while to change. So that administration, that legislation, pardon me, that's been out there for a minute to change that term and to change how it's calculated to make it more relevant to families today, because that term has been around for a long time, as well as the calculation, but it's what we have to work with right now. So your financial need is calculated. We take your cost of attendance minus your expected family contribution, and that's how we determine a family's financial need. Now, there are schools that meet 100% of financial need, and there are schools that strive to meet part of your financial need. And it's important to understand that distinction while you're shopping for colleges. Your offer letter, which will, if you're like me and you've been in financial aid for a minute and you forget that you need to change with the times, will often refer to as a financial aid award, your financial aid award, but it's not really an award. It's your offer. It is the financial aid you have been offered. So schools will be referring to, and you'll see it labeled at the top as your offer letter, financial aid notification, maybe another term. And then again, if you're like me and don't always catch up with the times, you may accidentally still refer to it as a financial aid award letter. But what that is the offer from your school that you're going to compare with all the other schools. And it's going to show you, what did you get in merit aid? What did you get in need-based aid, in self-help aid? And we'll talk about those in a minute. And so here we talk about the financial aid package. And then your promissory note. Your promissory note is a document that is completed online if you choose to borrow either federal or private loans. And the promissory note is simply the agreement between you and the Department of Ed that says you understand that this is a loan that must be repaid. So again, you may, when we talk a little bit more down the line, that's a term that you'll hear. Next slide, please. So I talked about this briefly. You have your direct cost, which that is actually what's going to show up on your bill. Most, depending on what type of term your college or university has, a W&J, in a lot of schools, it's semesters. So they bill you by semester. So each semester you'll get a bill that has your tuition and fees and room and board. I don't like the expression room and board. I find it very quaint, but it doesn't really make sense. So think of it as your dormitory cost. Whatever dorm you're going to live in, it's going to have a cost. And then your board is your meal plan, which usually you're required to have. And those are actually, that's what shows up on your bill. Your indirect costs are things like books and supplies. So every school does it differently, but a lot of schools, you purchase your books and supplies on your own. They're not charged to your bill. Transportation, how are you going to get to and from your college or university? Depending on where you go, you may be 30 miles away, but you may be 1,800 miles away. And then personal expenses like cell phone and things for your dorm room. Those are your indirect costs. Your university or college doesn't charge those to you directly, but you need to make sure that you're prepared to cover them. So those things combined are cost of attendance. The cost of attendance is the dollar amount that the colleges and universities strive to meet when they're offering you a financial aid package. Next slide, please. So going back to the EFC, right? We love our acronyms. So we're all going to be pros at the end of this. We're going to throw that word around and be like, oh, I know what my EFC is. I saw it calculated on my FAFSA. Your EFC, your expected family contribution. So what goes into that? Because there is a formula. And Kevin and Dana and I, when we started in financial aid, one of the things that you have to do is you have to learn how to calculate it by hand. It's long and it's cumbersome and it takes a few pages and it has charts, not unlike some of the income tax charts that you have to use when you do your taxes. But it's important that we understand that so we can help you understand, well, where did this number come from? So you don't feel like it's arbitrary. So the things that go into the EFC is parent income, parental assets. So those are things like everything except your retirement and the home that you're living in. So rental properties, investments, mutual funds, things of that nature. Cash checking and savings. Student income for students who do have income and do work. Student assets. So students can also have assets just like parents. The family size. Are there 5 people in the household? And the family size household is considered people that the parents support. And then out of the family size, how many of those people are in college? So do you have brothers and sisters? Like for instance, when I was going to college, my sister was also in college. My brothers were not. So my parents we listed, there was 4 people in the household. 2 of those were in college. And all those things come together to calculate your expected family contribution. Next slide, please. So here we go, your cost of attendance. Again, you're going to add up your direct cost, your indirect cost, you're going to subtract your EFC, and that's your financial need. And that is the number that most colleges and universities are using to determine. So for instance, if you go to a school that uses a CSS profile and says they meet 100% of demonstrated need, that number, that financial need, that's the number that you will get on your offer letter, on your financial aid package. Other colleges and universities that aren't able to meet 100% of need are going to try and meet as much of that as they can. And we're going to do that in a combination of types of aid. And we'll talk about those now. Next slide, please. So categories of aid. Again, this goes back to, these are terms you're going to hear us use, and it makes it easier in the conversation if you arm yourself with these terms so that when you're talking with your financial aid office or your admissions counselor, you guys are on the same page. And I empower each and every one of you. If your admissions counselor or if your financial aid office, if they're using terms that you don't understand, that are unfamiliar to you, I empower you to say, I don't know what that means when you say gift aid. I don't know what that means when you say self-help aid. That's our job. We're here to walk you through the process. And so please don't hesitate to ask. So gift aid, scholarships and grants, essentially, like Mr. Smith talked about, the free money. Scholarships and grants can both be need-based, which means they're going to look at your EFC, they're going to look at the family's income that was calculated, and they're going to look at the information on the FAFSA, or they can be merit-based, which means that you earn them based on either academic merit, or they can be things like music or athletic scholarships. Self-help. This is a very important and often overlooked category. Self-help aid is something that can lead to a choice-filled life, because there may be a gap. If you do not go to a school, or even if you go to a school that fills 100% of demonstrated need, there still may be a gap between what you're able to pay and what the bottom line is at the school that you're attending. Self-help aid is a choice for families and a tool for students to use to help bridge that gap. And that's loans, so money that needs to be repaid, usually after you graduate from college, and then student employment. And so that's a way, I know when I was in college, I worked in the girls' dormitory at the front desk. We have, Kevin and Dana and I, and Marlinda, we all have student employees working in our building. They do all kinds of things for us. They're very engaged. It's a great way to help support some of those indirect costs that we talked about. But those are, again, they're often underlooked types of aid. Next slide, please. So where is this money coming from? You know, what money trees are growing these? So we've got 4. Institutional, when you hear that term, and you will hear that term, that means that is money that is coming from the school that you are attending. So if they say it's in one of the things that you want to make sure that you do after you've decided on your school and you've got your offer letter, make sure that you read the policies related. Every school should have a financial aid handbook or a student handbook. And when you see the word institutional, that's referring to that's money that's coming from the college or university you are attending. Either money that is coming from alumni. So for instance, I graduated from Texas State, way down in Texas where I'm from, and I'm an active alumni. And one of the things I do is I give back to my school because they did so much for me. And the money I give back goes to create scholarships for students that are currently attending. Or there's other sources of institutional aid, but that's what that means, that it's money coming directly from the college or university. Federal means it's coming through the Department of Education, and it's part of Federal Student Aid Services, so FSA. So that's going to be things like Pell Grant, Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant, federal loans. State, here in Pennsylvania, we have FIA, which Mr. Smith mentioned at the beginning. Most states, I came here from Texas, and Texas has the Higher Education Coordinating Board, and they have state aid programs. And then there's private sources. So those are things like third-party donors. So anyone here who's going to get the scholarships that Mr. Smith mentioned, those are considered private. If you're getting a scholarship from one of your parents' employers or your church or the Kiwanis Club, or any of the outside scholarships, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that's private. And again, those are the scholarships that we should all be searching for. If you're a senior, you should be searching for those right now. We'll talk about that in a moment. Next slide, please. So the federal Pell Grant. The reason we give this grant its own slide is because this is the largest source of need-based aid available. The Pell Grant has been along. My mom graduated from NYU in 1974. I'm sure she'd be horrified that I just told you all that, but she's not here. Mrs. Bowman is not here. And she had a Pell Grant when that's actually back then. It was enough to get her through NYU. It paid every single semester. One of the reasons I talk about that is not to be discouraging, but to let families know and to help us understand that unfortunately, federal aid and state aid hasn't kept pace with the cost of attending higher education and getting a degree. So a Pell Grant at a local community college is going to pay for the cost of your direct cost. A Pell Grant at a private university is not going to make as much of an impact, but it is an important piece of your financial aid package. So this is all based on the EFC. So going all the way back to the beginning, your expected family contribution. Your award amount is based on your enrollment. And that's an important, I realize I keep saying important, but this is something you want to note right here. Everybody take a note. 99% of the funds that you are going to receive, so institutional, state, your financial aid package, all of it, is assuming that you are going to school full-time, that you are a full-time enrolled student. And when you're full-time, you're eligible for 100% of what you see. Once you drop below full-time, it changes everything. Your award package will change, your Pell Grant, which is part of that, will change. So something to be mindful of. If you think that maybe you might consider going part-time, that's a very important question to ask and speak with your college about. What does that do? Because it will, 99% of the time, it will change everything. Last year, the minimum award for the Pell Grant was $652. So that meant families with higher EFCs, that was the max they could get for the year. And that's based on taking 12 hours each semester or finishing for a year, 24 hours. The maximum award last year was $61.95. It went up $150. And again, I say that to say, as you can see, we all know that tuition and fees generally went up more than that. And so the Pell Grant just hasn't been able to keep pace with the rising cost of higher education. This, your FAFSA application, is what lets us know if you're eligible for this. So you don't need to do separate applications. What you need to focus on is your FAFSA, because that tells us what you're eligible for. Next slide, please. Your state grants. So you do have a separate application for that. Pennsylvania residents for at least 1 year, 8 semesters. So going back to going to school full-time. If you go to school part-time, you're not going to finish in 8 semesters. If you don't finish in 8 semesters, your aid's going to run out. So something to think about as you're laying out your, if you ever get to a point, which, you know, Kevin and Dana, we have students come in and they say, oh, Miss Dana, I just microbio, it's so, and it is. There are going to be hard classes. I want to drop it. Well, you have to stop and think. If you drop it, so where's the money going to come from down the line to pay for that? Because at a lot of schools like Washington and Jefferson and most of the other universities and colleges I've worked at, your scholarship is only good for 8 semesters. So if you need a 9th semester because of choices you made, where's that money going to come from? I'm not saying it's impossible, but these are things to think about. We have to think a little bit more long-term when we're talking about that. So the other thing we need to consider is your academic progress. Are you meeting the minimum academic standards? Which again, for your scholarships, for the Pell Grant, for the PA State Grant, all that information is out there for you to read, and it's made transparent. It's going to be on the website. It's going to be on any documentation you get. So you have that information and you are able to go into your freshman year fully armed, knowing what's your responsibility. And then we know our responsibility is to process your FAFSA in a timely fashion and make sure we're there to answer your questions. For the PA State Grant, you need to be at least half-time or greater enrollment status. But again, if we circle back up here to the top, you only get 8 semesters of eligibility. So if you're going half-time, it's not going to leverage those funds. Deadlines. You have to submit this FAFSA by May 1st to be eligible. The FAFSA opened October 1st, and deadlines are very, very important. In some ways, there are some institutions, sometimes public institutions, that aid is on a first come, first served basis. And it is based on the order that your FAFSA was received. And then if you were selected verification, we'll touch on that briefly, When was that completed? So I know, as a senior, you have so much going on. You have so much going on, and it's really an exciting time. In this time, it's an unconventional time, but it's so important to be mindful of those deadlines. I don't know. I know I used to, when I first started in financial aid, I would always tell my students, I say, okay, get a spreadsheet and start keeping track of all the scholarships you've applied for and have a tab that shows you all your deadlines. If you're like me on my iPhone, I use the reminders and I set it yearly because I have nieces and nephews in college now. And one of the things, I won't lie, I help them with their financial aid. I have a note on my phone. It goes off every October 1st and it says, Aunt Bethany needs to do the FAFSAs, again, for my nieces and nephews. So I use the reminders. Find a tool for yourself that's going to help you manage your deadlines. And that's just something that you'll do, even just becoming a college student. You'll need to be mindful of all these deadlines. Next slide, please. Okay, so institutional aid. Going back, institutional aid is money that's coming from your college or university. Largest source of funding. Grants, usually those are need-based. They can be non-need-based. And so again, that may be driven by your EFC. Scholarships, the reason it's largest here is because scholarships are the largest amount of money you can get for your education. But more than that, they're the thing that you have control over. Families, parents, there's nothing you can do to alter your EFC. Your EFC is what your EFC is because your earnings are what they are, your taxes are what they are, and your investments are what they are. So you cannot change your EFC. What as families, as students, what you have control over is, especially if you start the process early, is the size of your scholarship. Most schools are very, very transparent about, if you go to their website and you look for their merit scholarships, it's going to tell you, this is the GPA we're looking for. This is the class rank we're looking for. So if you know that early on, you can move the dollar amount of your scholarship by increasing your GPA. And so those are things that you'll want to search for earlier. Next slide, please. So we talked earlier about loans being a tool available to students and families, okay? Loans are used to help bridge that gap. They can lead to what I always think of as a choice-filled life. And that's a choice that every student and family together, you guys have to make as a decision because there's student loans, which mean you, the student, are responsible for repaying them. I had a student, we got an email today from a student that said, well, I filled out my master promissory note, but I put on there that my parents were paying it back, but it's still asking me how much I owe. And the reason that happened is because according to the Department of Education, those are loans in the student's name. And so the student is responsible for paying them back. You, as part of your FAFSA, will automatically be offered those at most schools, either all or some. Some schools that use the CSS profile you may be eligible, but it may not be part of your financial aid package because they've decided that they're going to fill that with other types of aid. There is subsidized and unsubsidized loans. Subsidized means that the Department of Ed is paying the interest on that loan. So the interest is, what is it costing you to borrow that money? And so you don't have to make payments on that while you're in school. Unsubsidized, the Department of Ed is not paying the interest. The interest is going to capitalize while you're in school. And then 6 months after you graduate or drop below part-time, that's another reason why it's important to stay full-time, you're going to go into repayment. Now, if you decide, which a lot of our students do, if you decide that you want to go to professional school, you are going to be a physical therapist, or you're going to go to dental school, or you're going to go on and get your master's in sociology. Once you go back into school, at least part-time, your loans will go into what we call a grace period again. But if not, then 6 months after you finish your senior year and you're gainfully employed, it's time to start repayment. There are, on the website, studentaid.gov. So everybody write that down. Studentaid.gov has so many wonderful tools. That's run by Federal Student Aid, the Department of Student Aid. And one of the wonderful tools on there, which I use with my nieces and nephews, and we use with our students, is a loan calculator. You can put in, okay, well, if I borrow, over the course of my college career, if I borrow $30,000, what's my monthly payment going to be? And then if you say to yourself, well, I'm going to be, a teacher, well, how much money are you going to be earning as a teacher? How much can you afford to pay? Those are the things that you'll want to think about when you decide as a family, is this the right choice for me? Whether you're subsidized or unsubsidized and the amount of the loan that you're offered, it's the same at every single school. It is determined by your grade level and your financial need. And so that's why we go back to the FAFSA and your EFC. Now, parents, there's also federal parent loans. It's called the Parent Plus loan. Any parents who attended graduate school, you may have used a Graduate Plus loan, and that's for graduates. So for seeking a degree after your bachelor's degree. Parents can borrow on behalf of your students. And so these loans are in your name. Families can use a combination of this. Studentaid.gov is where you're going to do that application. Generally, schools do not offer the parent loan. You would go apply for it, and then a notification goes to the school saying, I've applied for this loan. The interest rate currently is 5.3, and it changes every July 1. You'll do your borrow your loans, that process, parents and students, that happens every single year. So that's why we go back to our iPhones. We set a reminder every October 1st, do the whole financial aid, because it doesn't follow you for 4 years. It's something you're going to do every year. Now, the student loans, those do not require any kind of credit check, no kind of employment or anything like that. So the most a freshman can get is $5,500. They're not huge loans because, again, there's no credit check or anything of that nature. Now, parents have much more borrowing ability. What we say is parents can borrow up to the cost of attendance. So whatever is not currently covered by the student's financial aid. Now, those do require credit approval. And again, you'll go to studentaid.gov, fill out your application, and you get your response immediately, and then it goes to the school and the school finishes processing. Next slide, please. This is referred to as campus-based aid. So you may see that term on your school's websites or things like that. So we talked about federal work study. Most schools have some type of federal work study. The actual federal work study does require you to have financial need, and that's determined by what we see on your FAFSA. But at a lot of schools like W&J, we also have institutional work study, right? So going back, that school, that's money that's provided by the school. And you don't have to have financial need to use that. And this is something that gives you the opportunity to work on campus, gain valuable skills, but also contribute to your education or just provide that money for those things, those indirect costs. These are just like any other part-time job. You'll apply on the website of the school that you're going to. For the most part, they've got a job board. And then you get your job, and the pay rates are not dissimilar from what you would see if you work part-time off campus. There's even instances where they'll pay more for very specialized. So for instance, if you are a lifeguard, I've heard Mount Lebanon, I'm new to the area, but I've heard you guys have an incredible pool. If you happen to be a lifeguard, we need those, and they do get paid at higher rates. Or if you work your way up and become a lab assistant. And that's funds that are paid directly to you. They don't go to the school. Some schools have a situation where any work study earnings you can put towards your bill, but it also can go directly to you. The Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, it's called SEOG. You'll see that listed on the Student Aid website. Schools do get funding for that, and that is based on financial need. And most schools get very little funding, and so that's one of the ones that's a first come, first serve. We get so little funding. That's why, again, it goes back to very important to get your FAFSAs filled out by October 1st, because one of the things that we use to determine how do we allocate those funds, because we don't have enough for everyone, is the application deadline, in addition to the financial need. Next slide, please. So we talked about private sources, and this is an important, again, tool and resources for students and families to use to help, again, bridge the gap between what the school is able to provide and what the family is able to provide. So services, fraternal organizations, I know we see a lot from when I was in, you may see them from local unions, you may see them from your parents' employers. I know, coming from Texas, a lot of refineries down there, they gave out a lot of scholarships. They supported their employees' children. Your church may have it, or religious groups, high schools, Mr. Smith talked about that, foundations, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Those are all places that provide scholarships. Some places where you can do some searching. We offer these up because we trust these sites and we know they're vetted. So finaid.org, collegeboard.org, and fastweb.com. Next slide, please. So what's our timetable? I talked about this a little bit earlier. So now is the time to be looking for scholarships. It's always, I know Kevin and Dana and we have students every year who, they get their offer and it's summer, they've graduated and they've made their choice, and then they see the bottom line and they realize they need some help bridging the gap, and they say, oh, well, what scholarships are available? There are no scholarships available the summer before you start college. The scholarships are all being decided now. So application, you need to be doing those now. You need to be searching now. Usually those scholarships applications, they're going to close December 1st. Some of them may be January or February. So now is the time to be out there and looking for that. Attending financial aid programs. You can do that all the time, but it helps to attend early or even as a junior. Every October, file that FAFSA October 1st. You don't have to, when I was a student, pardon me, I always had to hound my dad. I'd have to be like, Pop, I need you to file your taxes. For a lot of reasons, he wasn't really excited to file his taxes. Now, for the same reasons, I'm not excited to file my taxes. But you don't need to have your current year taxes. It is what's called prior year. So for instance, for this FAFSA, families are using 2019, which again, unconventional year. But normally those should be done. So it's not like when, years ago before they made that change. I know at Washington and Jefferson, we send out, if we receive your FAFSA, if you're one of the first FAFSAs we receive, we start sending out notifications of financial aid packages in November. Scholarship notifications are already going out as well. Other schools may be different. So ask your school, they should have this on their website somewhere, or call the office and say, hi, I'm an incoming freshman and I want to know, when can I expect my financial aid package? Because again, when you make your decision, you need to be able to compare all your financial aid award letters. And so if you get one in November, but the other school says, well, we don't do that until January, then you just need to know that you need to wait and you have time to make your decision. Hopefully you have them all in January and you can start doing your reviewing. You're doing your campus visits, you're comparing apples to apples, and then May 1st is the date that most schools are going to ask you to make your decision and commit. So in a lot of ways, by May 1st, so by the end of your senior year, you should have done almost everything that you needed to do for your freshman year of college. What you'll do in the summer is things like attend new student orientation, things of that nature, maybe finish some loan documents, but everything is done during your senior year. So something really important to be mindful of. Next slide, please. All right, your FAFSA. Your FAFSA is a must. For your federal, state, and college aid, it calculates your EFC, your expected family contribution. 10 schools can be listed. So list all the schools you're interested in. If you have more than 10 schools, after you submit your first FAFSA, you list 10 schools, it's processed. Once your FAFSA is finished processing, and you'll get an email when it is, so you need to be checking your email regularly during this season. You can go back in, remove a school, and add more schools if you have more than 10 schools. By adding the schools, that's what gives us in a financial aid office permission to look at your FAFSA. If you don't add our school, we can't see your FAFSA. So you're going to be waiting, you're going to be looking, you're going to be asking, well, why haven't I gotten my financial aid notification? And it's because if you didn't list us, that's what gives the permission. Don't wait to be accepted for admissions. I know schools have, we've got regular decision, we've got early decision. Some schools' deadlines are a lot later. The financial aid application process should run concurrently and, next to the admissions process. Don't wait to be admitted. Give us your FAFSA. It'll be there. We can do all of our processing. And then as soon as you're admitted, then we can actually package your financial aid. I've already harped on it. You're going to apply every year at FAFSA.gov. And then you need to complete your other applications as required. So for instance, schools that require the CSS profile, they also need a FAFSA. So it's both generally. Other schools may even have their own financial aid applications. So make sure, and again, so you need to arm yourself, go to their websites. We try and put, especially in this day and age, all the information you need on that website. You can find all your forms, you can find your deadlines. We absolutely want to hear from you, but I also want you to know that those resources are available for you. Excuse me, one moment. Next slide, please. So we touched down that for this coming year, the 2021-2022 academic year, so that's going to be starting in August, you'll use your 2019 tax information, and that application opened on October 1st. I know, clear as mud, but it's always going to be for the next academic year, and it's going to be what we call in the industry. You'll sound really great if you call your financial aid officer and be like, oh, I know I need to list my prior year. They'll love that. Your prior year tax information, okay? So I know, a lot of moving parts, but that's why we wanted to put it out here. Next slide, please. So a million years ago, in addition to hounding my father to fill out his taxes, I also had to follow him around the house and ask him to sign my paper FAFSA. I know I'm dating myself. And then we would mail that in, right? So we don't do, you can do physical signatures, but it is not necessary, and it is much faster to sign with your FSA ID. Both students and parents should have FSA IDs, and that you'll do that on the FAFSA website, okay? That is your electronic signature. We sign most things these days electronically. Very few things need a physical signature. Believe it or not, one of the most frustrating things, I think all my colleagues on this will agree with me, for families is when they forget their FSA ID, because you only use it once a year, and then they can't remember it, and it's time to fill out the FAFSA, and they can't get back into their FAFSA. I know it sounds simple, but it can be very discouraging for students and or parents when you can't get that ID. You didn't write it down. You didn't I always just take a picture. Again, I get out my iPhone, take a picture, save it to my notes, because you only do it once a year. So it's not something like, your student portal that you log into every day. And it becomes very, very frustrating. And that is one thing that we as financial aid administrators, we have no access to that. We can help you with everything else except for recovering a lost FSA ID, because that ID, they verified your identity with Social Security Administration, with Homeland Security. And so there's nothing, we don't have access to it. We can't see your password, and that's for your safety and to protect your information. If you're interested, there is a worksheet you can fill out that is basically a copy of a FAFSA if you want to fill everything out there first and then fill out the FAFSA. I will say the FAFSA, it uses skip logic. So as you answer questions, it's going to bypass questions for you. If you tell it, no, I haven't filed my taxes, well, then it's not going to ask you to enter in line 7 from your 1040. So it's very user-friendly. There is an app, which is what I use for my nieces and nephews. I have it on their iPhones. You can do it online, or you can still do it paper, and you can actually do it by phone. It just takes a little bit more effort. The data retrieval tool. Sorry, one more thing here. So the data retrieval tool. The data retrieval tool is what populates the tax information. So for years, what would happen is families would come to the office, or you would sit down at home and you would sit there with your tax returns, right? You would pull out your if you use TurboTax, you would get it from there, or if you filed them yourselves, you would get all that. You'd get your W-2s, and then the FAFSA would say, okay, enter in this line. Now they have the data retrieval tool, which is a wonderful tool. It actually connects to the IRS database. You enter in some information off of your 1040, and it will import over your tax information. And that information is blacked, it's grayed out. So it's for your protection. You won't see anything there. But it will be populated. And by using that tool, it's much less likely that our office is going to need to ask you for anything. For those of you who may have other children in college, or who were in college yourself and got selected for verification, that's where the Department of Ed asks colleges and universities to verify that the tax information entered is accurate. And so then we actually have to say, okay, can you please, we need your 2018-1040, we need you to sign it, scan it, and send it in. Versus if you use the data retrieval tool, we don't have to do that because the information is coming directly from us. So I encourage you, when you're filling out your FAFSA and it gets to that point, don't bypass it, try and use it. Now, there are some filing statuses that are not eligible to use it, and it will be listed there what statuses those are if you're not eligible to use it, and then you'll enter in from your tax return. Okay, next slide, please. Dependency status. I'm going to touch on this briefly, as most students, most traditional college students, so graduated high school, went straight to college, are dependent students. Now, I was just on a phone today with a mother who, and I agreed with her, her son was very independent. He filled out all the forms on his own. That does not mean, even for our students who do earn and they've got money in the bank and they pay for their own cell phone and their own cars, the Department of Education says you are a dependent student until you are 24, have a bachelor's degree, are a veteran, as in you served in the military, or you have dependents of your own that you support. Those are the only reasons the Department of Ed will consider someone an independent student who is under the age of 24. I say that because a lot of parents are like, well, I don't claim my child as a dependent. There is no connection between this dependency status for financial aid purposes and how you file an IRS dependency status, or even the true independence of your child. So long as your student is an undergrad, 9 times out of 10, they're going to be a dependent student, which means they are going to need your financial information, and that's what's going to drive the financial package. Now, there are instances, independent students, orphans, warders of the court, students who are unable to locate their parents, or it is unsafe for them to do so. Normally, the high schools are aware of those situations, and they'll document that for us here in the financial aid office, because then that allows us to award federal and state aid to a student who would normally need parent information, but is unable to provide it. Next slide, please. So data requested on the FAFSA, demographic information, it's going to ask you social security number, date of birth, parents. It's going to ask you what level of education have you obtained. That does not have a bearing on your EFC. That's used for data collection purposes. Household size, number in college. For both students and parents, your income earned from work, your AGI, that term, your adjusted gross income, taxes paid, any untaxed income, cash, investments, and business value. It's also going to ask your college, so you need to list your colleges. And then for each college, you have to say, am I living on campus, off campus, or am I going to be living with my parents? Those are generally, those are the 3 choices. And you need to provide that because that also drives your financial need, and it drives how schools offer financial aid. And then you'll need to provide your signature. Again, parents and students both need a signature. Next slide, please. So your FAFSA results. We talked about your student aid report. That actually goes to what's called the central processing system, and that's what calculates your EFC, and you'll get the email notifying you when that's been done. And then about a day after that is when it comes to the school. Now, because we did get this question too, the FAFSA opens on October 1st. You fill it out on October 2nd. You get your email on October 3rd saying it was processed. Kevin, Dana, and I cannot see it on October 5th. I promise you we cannot. No school can. I know you're excited, but I don't want you to get frustrated when a month goes by and you don't hear anything. The reason for that is that we don't start processing those. We don't load them into our systems and start processing those. Some schools don't do it until November. We're working on getting those right now. So there is going to be a delay. Now, if it is after November at most schools, and you filled it out and submitted it, and you don't see that it's on your student portal, because most schools, you're going to have a student portal that you're going to follow. If you don't see it there, if it's December, if it's January, and it's not there, then you need to call the school and say, I submitted my FAFSA, go back to your email, right? Because you're going to get your student aid report, and you can say, well, I submitted it on October 25th. And then you're going to work with your counselor to figure out, okay, why isn't it there? Did you not list the school? Because remember, if you don't list the school, we don't have permission to view it. Or did your parent not sign it and so it never was able to get processed? If you have to make any corrections, and that happens sometimes too. Let's say you're one of the families who can't use data retrieval, right? You can't connect to the IRS. Did you need to make corrections? You just go back to the website, FAFSA.gov. Student, you'll log in with your FSA ID, and then you can actually just change the answers that you need to change. Let's say you added an extra zero to taxes paid. We would probably never do that, but we might. Let's say you did that and you need to correct it. You'll just change that answer, save, and then submit to the end, and then add your FSA ID again and submit it, and it'll go back to the school and it'll go through the same process again. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, for application tips, you need to complete all the applications. I know when I worked at a school that required the CSS profile, it was always, I've always felt for families and students who would call and they were like, oh, I'm calling to get my financial aid information. And we would say, well, we haven't been able to give you anything because we don't have everything we need from you. And this goes back to, there are things that the school is responsible for doing, and then there's things that students and families are responsible. So for instance, until you submit a FAFSA, there's nothing we can do to offer you financial aid. Until you submit the additional documentations that we've requested, we can't offer you financial aid. Now, after you've submitted them, then you absolutely have an expectation to be able to say, well, how long does processing take? When can I expect to hear about this? And see it logged on your portal. And so I always think of it as a partnership between the financial aid office and students and families. We each have some heavy lifting to do. You start the process by filling out your FAFSA, and then we take it from there, and it becomes a back and forth until we get you a comprehensive package and you've made your decision. Again, if you're sitting in here tonight, and you're thinking, well, I need to wait to see, if I'm admitted. Don't wait for admissions. It does never hurt to send your FAFSA application to a college or university. It can only help. There is a FAFSA, what's called Forecaster, available at FAFSA.gov. And basically it can give you an estimate of what you may be eligible in federal aid if you're interested in seeing that. I think it's a tool, but I always encourage all families, take 30 minutes, sit down, complete the FAFSA. Even if you just do it their freshman year and maybe you decide that there was no benefit to you, but at least do it, because the families can sometimes be surprised by what schools are able to provide. Next slide, please. Federal methodology. This is that formula I told you about at the beginning that Kevin and Dana and we all had to learn how to calculate by hand, and it calculates your EFC. So on the next slide, talk a little bit about what that means actually. The CSS profile uses what's called the institutional methodology, and that means that the school actually creates their own formula. And every school has a different formula, and that's what they use that information on the CSS profile for. So the federal methodology calculates a parent contribution and student contribution, and those two added together is what give us your EFC. And this is based on the 2021-22 formula for a dependent student. We'll show you some of the things about that formula. Next slide, please. So parents, we talked about, right? You're going to get out your 1040 and it's going to ask you for your AGI, and it's going to ask you for taxes paid, cash checking and saving, and investments. Does the FAFSA assume that you have all of that to give to your child's education? No. The federal methodology has allowances built in. So for instance, it already assumes that 11% of your income is unavailable to pay for your child's education because it's going to medical cost. It also has allowances based on the state that you say you're a resident in, for income taxes, for cost of living, things of that nature. It doesn't assume that it access to 100% of your assets. Now savings, yes. Again, and that goes back to, regardless of, we all have our personal thoughts and opinions and ideas about this. But what my goal here tonight is to help you understand, well, this is how the Department of Ed uses the FAFSA. And so for savings, for students, for instance, it assumes 100% of that is available to contribute to the student's education. And so it doesn't what we call protect any of that income. But income minus allowances is what then leaves us with the available income that the Department of Ed has said, okay, this is what this family has to work with to support this child's education. Next slide, please. Once a student is accepted and a FAFSA has been received, an offer letter is going to go out to the student. Again, at Washington and Jefferson, we're starting in November. I got to give a little shout out to my buddy Kevin. He has been working his tail off to make sure that those go out in a timely fashion, because you guys need that information and it's just an uncertain time. So one of the things schools are trying to do is be better and get you that information in a timely fashion so that you know and you can start, comparing and making your decisions. Now, back in the day, before prior, these things didn't happen until January. And so it was this really compressed timeline. So your offer letter, that is the first look at the actual cost of attending that college or university of your choice. Because on your offer letter, it's going to say, this is your direct cost. This is how much we've offered you, and here's your bottom line. That's how we refer to it. And most schools should have all those things on there. In fact, states are actually trying to get to a point where schools have to have the same format for their letters. So it's easier for families to truly see, well, what is it going to cost me out of pocket here versus here? Next slide, please. So you do have to compare your offer letters. And y'all, I understand, I really do. I came from Texas. I don't know if y'all are college football fans out there, but my father, he wanted me to go to Texas A&M. He wanted me to be an Aggie. But at the end of the day, when we compared offers to offers, the cost of attendance at Texas A&M was higher than the cost of attendance at Texas State, and they were both giving me the same amount of aid. So it was going to cost me more out of pocket. And again, I had a sister in college, and there's always choices to be made. And so that's why why it's important to compare apples to apples, okay? So make sure you're comparing tuition costs. Make sure you're comparing room and board. Again, schools may use different terms, but it's your dormitory cost and your meal plan cost. Remember the difference between your gift and self-help aid. Some schools are going to what we call package loans more heavily. So some schools may package parent loans. They may package private loans. So that school may look like it's giving you $60,000 in aid, but it's $30,000 of it private and parent loans. And so that's why we talk about, and it should be very clear on your letter, it should say the Washington and Jefferson grant, direct federal student loan, subsidized loan, federal work study, so that you can compare them across the board. If there's something on your offer letter that you don't know, that term doesn't mean anything to you, this is where I empower you to call that financial aid counselor, because that's our job. Our job at any school, and we've all worked, Kevin and Dana and I, we've worked at other schools. It is our job and our responsibility when we call and you say, what is the N56 grant? I don't know. What is the PATH grant? For us to explain, it's free money, and this is what you need to do to keep it. And this is how we determined you were eligible. Use the bottom line to determine the value and affordability, right? So just real quick, let's say your cost of attendance is $50,000. Well, actually, next slide. I actually have this on here. The other thing to consider is, we'll do some comparison in a moment, but consider the annual aid renewal criteria, okay? So make sure, is your EFC, if your EFC changes, are you going to become ineligible for something? So parents in the room, what does that mean? That if you change jobs, which good on you, if you get a job and you get a salary bump, let's think about, well, what does that mean for this particular type of aid? Now, again, if it's a merit scholarship, which is what our students have 100% control over, because it is driven by your class standing and it is driven by your GPA, they're not going to be impacted. Sometimes what we see, I know as the years have gone by, we'll see sometimes, are you going to retire halfway through when your child, and what is the school's philosophy about that? Are they going to make allowances for the fact that now you're living on retirement income versus your employment income? It's important that you don't assume that just because your income goes down, the school will then say, oh, well, you're earning less, so now it's going to be, you have more need. So be mindful of those things. And again, there should be very transparent with your school. Special circumstances. You know, in these times, we have a lot of people who have had to change jobs, or they have less hours, you're earning less. Everything just looks very different right now. And so even, you know, if we pull out our 2019 taxes, do we look the same on paper as we did in 2019? Is our AGI the same? If it's not, because you've been impacted, something beyond your control. If you were in a field that, you know, when I think about, you know, all of our small business owners out there, if you're simply bringing in less because you don't have the customers, then you need to contact the financial aid office and ask about a special circumstance. That's a fairly universal term. I think Kevin and Dana would agree that from Texas to Pennsylvania, it's called the special circumstance. And that's where you're saying, well, this is what I earned in 2019, but I have a third of the customers. You know, I was only open 3 months this year, or if you actually had to take a different job, or if you were furloughed. So maybe you didn't earn 1 out of the 12 months that you normally earn. The office needs to know about that, because we are empowered then to go in and make changes to your FAFSA on your behalf to see if you're eligible for more need-based aid. So financial aid can be a little private and a little bit uncomfortable, but again, it's that partnership. You need to trust that the financial aid office is working in your child's best interest, and be transparent with what's going on. The other thing is, make sure that when you look at your offer letter, that you're committed to that price for 4 years. It's always so hard when we hear from a family or a student that they can no longer afford. They're maybe a year in or 2 years in, and they can no longer afford their education. Unfortunately, financial aid offices in universities and colleges are not set up to be able to offer more money halfway through. Because, you know, we have to predict out, well, this is how much it's going to cost us to support this student for 4 years. And so be mindful of that make sure if it's going to be $10,000 a year, are you able to do that for 4 years? Again, if you retire halfway through your child's 4-year education, are you still going to be able to contribute that same $10,000? Or is your school going to be able to offset that difference? Next slide, please. So this is how we would encourage you to compare your offer letters. So the offer letters are going to look different. Some are very, you know, unfortunately look like a tax bill. Some have lots of bells and whistles, but all things you should be able to pull out. Get out your trusty spreadsheet. Is the cost, your expected family contribution, and then the need that the school says you have. And then you're going to go down and you're going to list out the types of aid you've received. And so you're going to see here, we've got scholarships, we've got state grants, we've got the Pell Grant, unsubsidized direct loan. And this is when we talk about making sure you're comparing apples to apples. Make sure you're not comparing a $9,000 scholarship to a $10,000 parent loan that they prepackaged for you, because those mean very different things to you financially. Next slide, please. I'm going to check time. I know sometimes I can go over, and I am, Mr. Smith. So I'm going to wrap up here so we can get to the Q&A. This is another example of comparing offer letters. Down here at the bottom, this shows what you could borrow in a Parent Plus loan or a private loan based on all the information the school provided. Next slide, please. So different payment options. There's payment plans that schools provide, monthly payment plans, quarterly payment plans. You can use alternative or private loans. And those are loans that are not provided by the Department of Education, but we encourage you to shop around just like you would for any other product, any other lending product. Plus loans we talked about, your savings, prepaid tuition plans, outside scholarships, VA benefits, things of that nature. Next slide, please. Here's our information. We're going to leave that up, Mr. Smith, so that, again, questions that you guys have, reach out to any of us. We like hearing from families. It's really one of the things we enjoy about what we do. and we'll get back with you. We know that sometimes, we may not get to your question this evening, but we want you to know that we're available to assist.
Great, thank you so much, Bethany. We really appreciate it. Thank you for everybody for coming tonight. And we'll open it up here to some questions. So if our attendees would like to use the hand raise function here in Zoom, and then Mr. Smiley, if you could unmute the microphone for our first couple questions here. I see we have 2 in here.
Hi, I'd like to ask a question. So on the parent loan, how is that? How's the interest accruing on that? Does that start the minute that you take it out, or is it after? How's that work? And when do you have to pay it back?
Yeah, so the interest definitely is a great question. I'm going to lean on my loan officer here because we're a team here, and we're going to go through the interest rates and then the payment terms of how that starts.
Hi, thank you, Kevin. Yeah, excellent question. With the interest rates on the PLUS loan, the interest will start accruing as soon as the loan disperses. So the majority of parents, let's say you're trying to cover a $10,000 gap for the academic year. They'll apply for that full $10,000 for the academic year. The first $5,000 will disperse in the fall, but interest is only accruing on that $5,000 until that second disbursement goes in the spring. Then now you're accruing interest on the full $10,000. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
All right, thanks.
Okay, so it looks like we have Brandy, the next one, if we could unmute her.
Hi, if I have a private source like an employer that's going to contribute to the cost of the education, do I supply that information?
You're referring to the financial aid office for your student going to college?
Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of times the employer or the scholarship or organization will actually want certification from the institution. If not, then you will send the check or offer or award letter, whatever they're going to send you. You would send that to the financial aid office, and then we would process that as a scholarship. And then the check would be applied just like a regular payment to the student's account.
But that doesn't go anywhere in the FAFSA or prior like calculations for
no it does. Yeah, no, it does not. And I always give the example of, let's say you are going to get $10 million from somebody, right? And then you do the FAFSA and you put down, oh, I'm getting 10 million. Then the day before you get that check, all of a sudden they go broke or the company shuts down or whatever. Now you're reporting money that you never really got. So it's live, it's kind of real time is what I tell families, is that, yeah, we know you're going to get it, but that's why you're reporting it to us, so then that way we can update your financial aid package with that scholarship.
Thank you.
Not a problem. We have a few more out there.
Hello.
Hello.
First of all, thank you for the presentation. It was excellent. I learned a lot of things. Basically, we just moved from abroad, and my daughter's not a U.S. citizen. Does this matter? I mean, I can't apply for a FAFSA application. I can't do a FAFSA application because I don't even have my tax returns for this year. We just moved 2 months ago to the U.S. I was just wondering, is there any financial aid or any scholarships for international students? I mean, I'm not sure what there is available for international students, not just local students.
Sure, great question. So yeah, the short answer is yes, there are scholarships available for international students. Speaking on behalf of W&J, we do offer scholarships to students who are not U.S. citizens. And that would be just a part of the normal application process. We review the student for merit scholarships, and the student can be matched up with a international scholarship. At a lot of other institutions, there also will be funding available for international students. However, sometimes it is limited because it depends on where the funding is coming from. So if the funding is coming from a specific organization or agency that requires U.S. citizenship, then you may not be eligible for those funds. But there should be some type of funding available, maybe not all institutions, but that would be where how Bethany has encouraged us to pull the coattail of the financial officer and say, hey, I want to know specifically at your institution, what do you do for non-U.S. citizens? And they would be able to assist you.
Okay, that's great. And is there a deadline for that, or do I have to wait until I'm accepted into a college before actually looking into financial aid or some kind of scholarship for my daughter?
No, so it's going to vary per school. So I always tell families first come, first serve. So I would start asking those questions now of those colleges that you're interested in. And one thing that I always tell families is don't wait to be accepted to start applying and asking about financial aid.
Okay,
So
thank
I
you.
would go and ask those questions now, and then just also that it's important to check your citizenship status that you're here in the States, because there are some rare non-citizenship statuses that could qualify for financial aid. So if you apply for the FAFSA and you have a social security number, you could complete the FAFSA as long as you have a social security number.
Yeah, I do. I work here.
Okay, so you could apply for, you could in theory could complete the FAFSA. It's then going to ask for the A registration number for the student that you are completing the FAFSA for. And then the school would reach out to you and ask for additional documentation, or it would verify that you are eligible for financial aid. So I say go ahead and give it a swing. All they can tell you is no.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for
All
that.
right.
Okay, thank you. Looks like we have Alicia up next.
Hello,
Hi.
Alicia.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good, thanks. My question goes back to what the very first question was on the Parent Plus loan, because just as it was being answered, for some reason, my audio cut out. And part of that question was, how soon do you have to start paying it back? Is it after the child graduates, or is it while they're still in school?
So you can start paying on loans if you choose to. And Dana, feel free to jump in if I'm saying something wrong here. But you can pay loans when you're enrolled in school. However, you are not required to start repayment of loans until 6 months after the last day of attendance. So for most students, that's going to be graduation day, right? But for some students who might take a gap year, might decide that they want to take a break. Unfortunately, something happens to them where they can't complete their studies. Whatever that last day is of their attendance, 6 months from that would be required repayment for those loans, and that includes for the Parent Plus loan. When you do the application, either you can pick to begin making payments immediately after disbursement, or you can elect to start making payment 6 months after the last day of attendance.
Okay, thank you.
Not a problem. Dana, do okay? I'll take that as a yes. All right. All right, who do we have next?
Thank you. Looks like we have Mary.
Yes, that question that was just asked, that was what I was going to ask about the payments. So I'm good. You answered that.
All right, Mary. Well, nice hearing from you.
Good work, Kevin. Two answers in one question.
You all have been trained well.
Looks like we have Paige up next.
Yeah, hi. I was wondering if your child is thinking of attending a school abroad, like possibly in Canada or in Europe. Do you still complete a FAFSA? Is there federal aid available, especially for like housing and things like that?
So the short answer I'm going to say is no, that you would have to be attending a U.S. school in order to receive the federal funds. But I feel like there is some type of Bethany, can you help me out? Are you aware of any type of funding that is available for U.S. citizens in other countries like Canada specifically?
I think you must have seen what I've seen. I know there is a reciprocal. I know Canadians can get Canadian financial aid to support their education in the United States. And there may be a few institutions where you can use federal student loans to offset in Canada. But that would be absolutely the question. You want to go directly to the school that you are applying to determine what resources they have and what. Because like I said, I know there's one reciprocal that goes one way, so there may be, and again, it would be federal loans. There wouldn't be any grant funding to offset for international education.
Thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Looks like we have Tori up next.
Hello, Tori.
Hi, this is Chan, Tori mom.
Hello.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you this evening?
It's okay. The reason this is a very good meeting, and I learned a lot from the guide. And I also have a question to ask you, like, if a single mom have a low income and daughter have a good grade, what happened if my income cannot send her to school, and who should I go for help? Like any?
No, that's a great question. So yeah, definitely, I can speak on behalf of W&J is that we do see the need and value those students that are very high academic achievers. However, they may not have the financial means to pay for a very expensive education. One example that we have is something called Good Neighbor at Washington Jefferson College, where we have a scholarship designated for students who are very high academic achievers. However, they demonstrate financial need by being eligible for both the Pell Grant and the, or not the Pell Grant, but the FIA state grant. They have to be eligible for that program. So that's one example of a scholarship that is targeted to help offset a lot of those costs. In addition, it would be similar to what Bethany was explaining, that if you are experiencing financial hardship, once you complete a FAFSA and receive a financial package, like the initial package, you want to receive that package first to see, you never know, you might get, the money you're looking for, and, you're all set to go. But once you get that package, if it doesn't meet the needs for you as a single parent with your income level, you want to approach that financial aid office and say, hey, my student is, 4.0, valedictorian, this, that, and the fifth, 1,500 on SAT, and have that conversation, have that frank conversation that you're asking me right now about. Specifically, what can you do to help my students succeed at your institution in our current financial situation and academic situation for my student?
Did you have any phone number, any thing on like email, anything like online? Can I get in? They get in touch with me. I have to get in touch with them.
Yeah. So if you want to, I don't know, you have a pen and paper ready now?
Yes.
Okay. So my email address is KTOTTY, and that's at WASH, WASH, Jeff, JEFF.edu.
Okay. So if I have any question, I just email you.
Yes, please email me directly, and we can set up some time to have a conversation, or we can just speak by email, whatever is more comfortable for you.
Okay.
And Ms. Doan, I'd also encourage you to touch base with your daughter's counselor about some of the local scholarship opportunities available in Naviance as well.
Okay. Well, this year she's only the junior, and then next year she will be graduated from Lebanon High School. Yeah. So
you're on it. I'm glad to hear that. I was worried she was a senior.
no, only junior. I always worry, and I always like think ahead. What should I help my daughter to be? Kids, let her go to college and do whatever she do.
Yes, you're doing a great job. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Ms. Doan. So next we have Christian Cox.
Hello, Christian.
Hi there. Thank you very much for spending your evening with us. I'm new to this process, and everything you guys have been saying and showing us has been very helpful and is very appreciated. So so let's say that there are two different families, right? They have the same income, same household size, same number of kids in college, taxes they've paid, etc. Right?
Okay.
So say family A has dutifully been putting aside money every month in a 529 plan, right? And they've been able to do this by making a lot of sacrifices, right? Family B has not saved and has been spending money on, luxury cars, fancy vacations, eating out, blah, 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 right? Is
Yes.
family A basically penalized for being responsible because their EFC is going to be higher and therefore they get less aid?
Well, thank you so much for this question. This is one of the fun ones, and I have to be very careful with how I respond to this because I do represent the Department of Education and their policies. But what I can say is that on the day that you complete the FAFSA, that is the day that we are asking for your asset and checking and savings information. So with Family B, if they don't have anything, if that money doesn't exist, then they wouldn't report it. For Family A, if it exists, then they would have to report that.
Okay, I think that's a good answer. Thank you.
Not a problem. I tried. And if you want to have a more direct conversation with me, because normally I'm there like to have the conversation, please email me directly. Let's have a phone call and let's have that conversation offline.
Okay, thank you very much.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have Jennifer up next here.
Good evening. My question is related to the FAFSA and divorced parents. So how does that work? Does one parent report the income? Are both expected to contribute to the information included in the FAFSA? Is it related at all to which parent claims the child on their taxes?
So the short answer for all of that is no. That the determining factor of who should be completing the FAFSA with the student is the parent that the student lives with 51% of the time. So there really shouldn't be a 50-50. It should be whoever the student is living with more than 6 months out of the year is the parent that should be on the FAFSA. Because some families, one parent will claim the child in 1 year, and another year, the another parent will claim the child, but it's really whoever the child lives with more during the year. With that being said, the other parent who the student is not living with, they would not report any of their information, and they would not be expected to contribute to the student's education. However, if that parent is contributing later in life on the future financial aid, the student would report. Let's say this is the first year in college, and the student, there's nothing that has been already given to the student. But let's say year 2 for the first year in college, parent 2 had given 10 grand last year to help pay the student's bill. That money we reported as untaxed income to the student on the FAFSA. So that's how that would catch up with the student in subsequent years. Does that make sense?
So would that include parent loans that would be taken out?
You're referring to a parent loan, like the parent B would take out the loans that is not on the FAFSA?
Correct.
Oh, no, the loans would not apply because those are loans.
It would just be actual money gift to pay for college expenses.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And it's who the student lives with most of the time, which may or may not correspond to the district that the student attends.
Correct.
Okay.
And even the taxes the child is claimed on.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
I want to interject real quick in light of that question. Families that are applying to schools that are asking you to fill out the CSS profile, so those are those highly selective colleges, you need to be mindful of when it comes to the CSS profile, no parent is excluded. Only the FAFSA excludes a divorced parent, and the child will choose whichever one they live with more. The CSS profile, both parents are required, and so if parents are divorced and remarried, both couples' information, each family will have its own CSS profile, and there is an expectation. There is schools have what they call non-custodial parent waivers that can be applied for, but that is, again, it is a situation when I worked at a CSS profile school, and most of them will only allow a parent to be excluded on a CSS profile if you cannot locate that parent, it's unsafe for the child to locate that parent. All the other expectation is that parent. I just wanted to say that because we would see a lot of families, because on the FAFSA, it's completely opposite. So logically, you would think that would be the case on the CSS profile, but it is actually the opposite. So I just wanted to interject real quick. Sorry about that.
No, thank you, Bethany, because I'm not sad with the CSS profile. So yeah, I don't want you to think that there might be some schools that require that information too. They might have a separate form that they want to know that information. So for the FAFSA, no, the answer is no, but you may have to provide the information at an individual school. And again, that would be a question between you and that financial aid counselor.
Was there any more questions? Anybody else would like to ask any questions to our panelists here tonight? If there are some more kind of private questions, oh, we have one here. Go ahead, Syed.
Hello.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for this informative presentation. So I have a question with two parts actually. First, my son actually, he has a green card like this PR. So how that's going to impact the FAFSA, the application? And the second, that he is in junior, so it means that he can apply this year and also next year. Thank you.
Not a problem. So the first question about the permanent resident card, as long as the student has, the key is having a social security number. So as long as the student has a social security number, they can complete the FAFSA. On the FAFSA, it's going to ask you your citizenship status. And if you're an eligible non-citizen, it's going to ask for that A registration number on the back of the permanent resident card. And you're going to be required to enter that information into the FAFSA. It's going to run a check, if you will, to determine if the student is eligible to receive federal aid. If the student is not determined to be eligible, the school will then reach out to you directly and say, can you provide me a copy of your permanent resident card, of your I-9, of your passport, whatever you have that permits you to be here in the States. Most cases, people who have permanent resident cards are eligible for federal aid. But again, I don't want to make that blanketed statement until you actually complete the FAFSA. So the first one is to complete that FAFSA and enter that A registration number into the FAFSA. The second question you asked, if I can remember, was regarding applying for the FAFSA both this year and next year. The student can complete the FAFSA at any point. However, you're not eligible to receive financial aid until you've completed a high school diploma or the equivalent. So there will be no real point this year if your student is a junior to complete the FAFSA, because they would just not be eligible for that aid. However, there is a financial aid forecaster, and I think Bethany might have mentioned this. I think I heard it in the presentation. If not, I'm just hearing things in my mind. But there is a financial aid forecaster that you can go out to the studentaid.gov website, and you can actually complete a little baby FAFSA, if you will, to determine your eligibility. There's also something on each and every school that they are required by federal regulation to include what's called a net price calculator. So you could go out to any institution you want to and search for their net price calculator, complete the net price calculator, and that will give you the estimate you're asking for when the student would be a senior.
Okay, thank you.
Not a problem.
Do we have any other questions for our attendees tonight? Well, great. If there are any more kind of private or more personal financial aid questions that anyone would prefer to ask any of our panelists here in private, they have agreed to take questions via email. Their emails are right there on your screen. So please feel free to reach out, and you can also reach out to your child's counselor as well. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. That was a fantastic presentation by the W&J team, and I really appreciate you all being here. And thank you to our wonderful Mount Lebanon families, students, parents for attending. And special thanks to Tara Lee for being here with me tonight, and our tech team for really setting this up. So thank you so much. This is a wonderful presentation, and I am looking forward to, as I'm sure you all are, the presidential debate here in about a half hour. So we wrapped up just in time, I'm sure. So thank you all again, Kevin, Bethany, Dana, Marlinda. Sincerely appreciate you being here.
Not a problem. Happy to be here.
Appreciate you having us. Thank you.